Here's the problem. You cannot control, nobody can, it's not their fault. You cannot control all the consequences of your acts. You have to have a certain humility. You can't do it. You can't promise to the American people what you just summarized very well, that I'm going to do these tariffs and trade wars and we're going to get all the jobs. This is the kind of fairy story that works if you're talking to a 4-year-old who's having trouble getting to sleep, and you tell them a story about the lovely fairy who came on the beautiful pony, and everybody had a picnic and ice cream, and by that time the 4-year-old's asleep, and you've accomplished it. And no one expects the story to kind of hang together. It doesn't really matter. But what Mr. Trump is doing, and it's going to come back and bite him in a very tender part of his anatomy, right? He's promising things. He can't control that. I'll give you just 2 or 3 examples. If you put a tariff, and by the way, a tariff is just a tax. Nobody should be hung up on the word. Tariff is just a name we give to a tax on things imported into a country. That's all. Nothing more than that. If you put a tax, it means that for all Americans, the thing that comes in now costs us more because we got to pay for that thing. Plus, we got to give Uncle Sam the tax he put on it. Okay. You know what that's going to do? It's going to make us buy fewer. We're going to buy fewer, let's say, French wine because there's a tax on it. And that tax doesn't apply to California wine. So you will go in the liquor store, and instead of picking up the bottle from France, you'll walk 3 feet further and pick up the bottle from California because it didn't go up. Okay, now, 2 things happen which all of economics teaches. Number 1, the California wine producers are going to rub their hands together and say, oh, great. Now that the cost of French wine has gone up, because they have to pay a tariff on it, we can jack up the price of our California wine and still get people to buy it because it'll be cheaper than what they have to pay for the French wine. So one of the results is often inflation. Poor Mr. Trump. He got into office in part because Mr. Biden presided over an inflation. If he does the same, it's going to be happy field day for the Democrats to do to Trump what he did to them. And he can't control that, Mr. Trump. He ought to be really careful, but he's not being it. Here's another example. Let's stay with our French example. I'm going to hit the French with a tariff on wine. Well, the French are not going to sit there with their fingers up their nose while he does this. There's going to be a tremendous pressure by the wine producers of France, who are very powerful, because that's a very important item in the French economy. They're going to go to their president, Mr. Macron, who's got the courage, political courage of a small mouse. And they're going to go to him and they're going to say, hey, do something. And what is Mr. Macron going to do? Well, he's going to do what Mr. Trump did. He's going to hit America with a tariff. For example, there's countries already that have been putting tariffs on American bourbon.
Yep.
Bourbon, bourbon whiskey is an export of the United States, and an important one. The United States is the only place that makes bourbon, and bourbon has become a popular drink in many parts of the world. So that produces a lot of jobs for Americans who grow the thing and who distill it into whiskey and put it in the bottle and ship the bottle and advertise all of that. All those people's jobs are in jeopardy because the rest of the world not going to buy bourbon if it costs too much more because the local countries are retaliating. Mr. Trump can't control the retaliation. Look at what's been going on the last 3 weeks. He puts a tariff on. Oh, my God, a day later, they retaliate. He says, okay, I'll take mine off. But you got to yours. Last thing, if you're a businessman, and I work with those folks all the time, if you're a businessman or woman and you're in charge of a company, let's say you're producing automobile parts in Mexico, and that's a big business, producing automobile parts in Mexico and then shipping them into the United States. If Mr. Trump puts a tariff, that means the price of the carburetor or the wheel assembly or whatever it is that comes from Mexico is going to go up, because when you import it, you got to pay this tax to Uncle Sam, the tariff. Okay, so now the idea is, gee, we don't want to lose the business, so we're going to move the factory from Mexico and move it across the border into Texas, because then it's only a few miles, and we produce in Texas. We don't have to pay a tariff. No one has to pay a tariff because it's produced in the U.S. That's the idea. See, make jobs in. But wait a minute, it is extremely expensive to move a factory. You have to move the machinery. You have to find a place. You have to find a whole new set of workers. That takes years, and it's a huge expense. No company wants to undertake that expense if they can't be sure that this tariff will really stick and be the reality. But you can't do it. Mr. Trump, look at him. One day he's doing it, the next day he's taking it off. Nobody in their right mind is going to undertake a big expense under that level of uncertainty. So here's what's happening. And it's not just about the companies that have activities in other countries. All across the American economy, the reaction to Mr. Trump's first 2 months in office is that the level of uncertainty is bringing us a recession. We're going to have a recession this year. More and more people believe it, myself included, because the uncertainty of Mr. Trump's behavior, the uncertainty of not knowing what retaliations will be undertaken by what countries, in what size, at what time. You don't know any of that, so you hold up. And when you hold up, then your plans to hire 50,000 Americans over here is put on hold. And your idea of building a factory over there is put on. You don't know enough and can't be sure enough to risk it. The vice president of X company is not going to risk his reputation, his future of moving up in the company by making a decision based on a wobbly president like this one. Yeah. So you're looking at Mr. Trump not understanding the limits of what he can do, promising the moon, getting a lot of people. Wouldn't it be great if we had more jobs? Sure it would. But you can't keep riding. That's like the old joke, when you can't afford gas, you drive your car on the fumes. All right, nice idea, but it doesn't work very long, Gets you stuck out there on the road, and then no one's going to come pick you up. Mr. Trump, at this point, and I say this, I'm not a supporter of his, I'm not a particular enemy of his. For me, Mr. Biden and Mr. Trump are equally unattractive as leaders. Put that aside, I don't think he can survive what he's doing. He's going to have to change fairly drastically what he's doing, because this is economic craziness. And all of it, I think, is explained, to go back to what I said at the beginning,
to now.
We're as a nation, we can't face the reality that our empire is declining, that our system is now having to compete for the first time in a century with a serious competitor, which is China. The Soviet Union worried us militarily, but economically they were irrelevant. They were way too small, way too poor. It was never a serious economic and political threat. It was militarily once they acquired nuclear weapons, which is why they are the nuclear power par excellence today. They realize that's what gives them their standing in the world. The United States has to come to terms with this. Bullying and showboating, it's not going to work.